The Bell Jar is not usually read in 8th grade, but we read it for an honors class. The Bell Jar is a story that reflects off the life of Sylvia Plath, the author of the novel, and how she dealt and coped with depression. The Bell Jar is a fascinating book because it shows the reality of depression and the struggles of it. Esther Greenwood, the protagonist of the novel, is a 19-year-old girl who goes to New York City for a writing contest. She meets many of the antagonists throughout the story in the novel, and those include Buddy Willard, who is Esther's love, but he doesn't feel the same about her. Joan Gilling, who goes with Buddy to the dance, and Esther seems kind of jealous of her. Dr. Gordon, he doesn't really seem to care what Esther says. He's her doctor, and he just seems like a doctor to her because he never listens to her. And Esther's mother is another antagonist because Esther doesn't like her mother and she doesn't treat her right sometimes. Moreover, the story is built and structured in chronological order. This shows that it is in chronological order because it starts off with Esther being normal, goes into her depression, and then towards the end, she starts to build her confidence. Based off the protagonist and the antagonist, this shows the main conflict of the story. The main conflict of the story is main character versus society, or Esther versus society. Esther feels trapped and isolated from everyone because she feels that no one understands how she's feeling and no one knows what she's thinking. She feels secluded and recovers. Throughout this, there are many flashbacks that interrupt the story. This is when Esther goes back and talks about how she feels through depression. An example is when she's in the hospital and she mentions about how she felt after taking the pills and her treatments. These moments of the book are the strengths and weaknesses of the book. Some strengths of the book is how Esther views the world in a negative way. Esther looks at the world very negative and she seems pessimistic, and I find that as a strength because it's interesting to see how a view of the world is in a different perspective. Some weaknesses of the book is how Esther has many suicidal attempts. I find it very interesting that she has suicidal attempts, but it brings her life it brings it to a down point. And also, I think a weakness would be how Esther has sexual encounters in the book. She finds her life to be even more troubling than it was, and it's worse, and it's becoming worse even more. In the strengths of the novel, there are many symbols that make a huge impact on Esther's life. Some of these include babies and the bell jar. Babies are of great importance in Esther's life because it shows that she has no men to trust. In the book, Esther found out that Buddy was a hypocrite the day his baby was born. Also, babies represent that Esther is still undecided about getting married and having children. The other use of symbolism in the book is the bell jar. A bell jar is a glass container that is meant to cover things, and Esther feels like she's trapped under a bell jar. This is because Esther feels separated from the rest of the world with depression, and she feels that no one understands how she feels, and she feels covered and basically trapped and that she can't get out. In the bell jar, Esther Greenwood progresses throughout her mental illness. Again, she starts from being regular, seeps into mental issues, and rises again towards the end. This shows progression because she takes her mental illness really far. She takes it downhill and then uphill again. As it appears in the novel, Esther is involved with a mental health system, or better known as a mental hospital, which helps her fight her psychological problems. The mental hospital is where Esther is given treatments such as shock treatments to help her get better, cope with their problems, and take the road to recovery. Speaking of the mental hospital, this is a very significant setting in the novel. This is where Esther gets help with her problem and along the way meets new people. Esther gets moved up to a new hospital called Belsize. Belsize is a more private hospital where it shows that Esther's improving, and there she meets Dr. Nolan, who is Esther's doctor and fulfills the mother figure for Esther that she really never had. Also, in Belsize, right next to Esther, she sees Joan, who she meets again. Another setting in the novel was New York City. New York City is where basically the book takes place overall. New York City was when Esther won the writing contest and stays at a hotel called the Amazon, and it's an all-girls hotel, and she meets many new friends such as Doreen. Another setting is Esther's home, where she lives with her mother. Towards the end of the novel, Esther goes to her house to sort of take a better life and start fresh. She tries to improve there, but at first she takes pills and overdoses herself. Anyway, she tries to recover, and this is basically the most impacted start of her depression, because while in the car on the way to her house, she lost many expectations because she discovered that she didn't make the final cut of the writing contest. In the time period of the novel, a woman's role was partially the same as it is now, but however, it was different. A woman's role was basically relied on because men were working and wives and mothers needed to cook and clean. Esther believed that women were only good for cooking and cleaning, and their school education would be forget about and it would just be wasted. However, I believe that women are good for both. Women cook and clean as well as taking on the same occupations as men do, and if not more. I believe that Sylvia Plath was trying to say that people have different views on feminism and the roles of women, but it's okay because a woman's role is important no matter what. To conclude, Esther Greenwood is fairly ready to leave the hospital. I believe this because she's improving on herself and making things better for her. She's trying her hardest, and I really think that if she goes home and leaves the hospital, she'll be able to start things completely fresh. Her future ahead of her is completely new. She could decide whether she wants to get married, have kids, and take on any occupation that she wishes. She can completely turn her life around as she's working on it right now and make her life so much better so she could just forget about her past. My overall view on the book, I really enjoyed reading The Bell Jar. I thought it was a great book, and I would recommend it to most readers, especially teens who are suffering with some issues, because it would really lead them and help them to understand that it's never too late to turn your life around, but don't let it get too carried away and don't let it get too far. There's a really important message getting across to the reader in this book, and I completely understand it, and I really enjoyed reading it. Overall, I really liked reading The Bell Jar in class.